Alright, we're back. Second episode. The feedback after dropping the first episode has been overwhelming, to be honest. I was surprised to hear how many people enjoyed the episode, and also how many people mentioned that they liked the format and that they liked just listening to a breakdown. So, I thought, let's keep this going. Let's do a second episode. And here we are. My name is Al Hug, and this is Minta Foundry Breakdowns. Before I even say anything about today's sample, I'm just gonna play it, and so sit back, relax, and have a listen. As you can hear, this sample is chopped and it has this old school, almost kind of boom bap vibe. I guess you could say it's heavily inspired by the music that I listened to growing up, which was a lot of J Dilla, Madlib, and the whole Stones Throw crew. And that is a common theme in a lot of my samples. So before I got to chop the sample, I had to kind of compose the whole thing. So today's episode is going to focus on two things. The first part is going to be about that composition. It's going to be about the instruments that I used, the processing that I used. And in the second part, I'm going to explain how I chopped the sample. So let's dive into the first part and listen to the sample, how it sounded just before I started chopping it. So as you can hear, it's this longer composition with different sections, different melodies, and we're going to look at all of that. I want to start out with the first track I used, which is a drum break from AJ Hall that I slightly chopped up to make it a bit more usable for this situation. What I like to do with drum breaks is exchanging snares for hi-hats and kicks for hi-hats. That gives me a lot more space in the composition and a lot more space for me to add stuff. That being said, AJ Hall's drum breaks are incredible, and I usually don't even have to do any processing on it because he's not only a great drummer but also an incredible sound designer. So go check out AJ Hall and his drum breaks, get some custom orders if you need, get some of his packs, you won't regret it. The reason why I like to work with drum breaks is then I don't even have to use the click, and it's a lot easier to create that human, natural, authentic feel when recording over drum breaks instead of a metronome. To give you an example, listen to beat 4 in the first bar. It's the second snare in this break, and you can hear how laid back it is. Let's listen again. That fourth hit is very laid back, and that's exactly what I like about his drum breaks. The next element I added is the piano. Let's listen. This is a very simple chord progression, to be honest, but the interesting thing is the placement of the chords and the way I change between long-held chords and short chords. So in this case, it's short, long, short, long, short, long, short. So by playing this rhythm, I kind of create this interplay between the drummer and myself. This is something I try to do all the time, recreating a live situation, imagining how the musicians will connect. The piano I recorded with a keyscape piano. The only processing I did on it was put it in mono. Usually the keyscape pianos are a bit too wide for my taste, so I like to put them in mono using just one of the two channels. In this case, it was the left channel, and also I ran it through my U-Heard tape deck and layered that recording. So it's kind of like parallel tape processing. The next element I added is this Glockenspiel sound from my second Mellotron expansion pack for Analog Lab 5 and the Arturia Mellotron instrument. It's the first sound from that bank, and I use it all the time. The next element I added is the bass. Every soul composition needs bass, so here we go. Next up is the guitar. The rhythm section was almost complete at this point, but I had another idea for a conga stem that would fill in all the blanks. So that's it for the rhythm section. The Glockenspiel, like I said earlier, kind of plays a top line melody for the piano, and I like that melody and I wanted to double it with another instrument. In this case, I decided to use the Wurlitzer. Now this is an interesting part. Listen to how the Wurlitzer first plays the melody and then kind of changes its role to a comping instrument playing the chords. So melody and chords and back to the melody. Chords. I like to do this because it creates this very natural feel of people being together in a room and playing together. An instrument doesn't necessarily have to be stuck in one role. It can travel from one to another. There was still some space in this composition, so I had an idea for a counter melody, and I used the banjo to play this melody. The banjo is a very cool instrument to use in these types of compositions because it has a very different sound to all the other instruments. It has this very resonant transient that I like, very similar to a sitar, for example. really mentioned any of the processing because, to be honest, there aren't any plugins on these stems apart from maybe a Fairchild here and there, an API here and there. But I'm not doing any sound design to the composition because at this point I already knew that this was going to be a longer composition, and I already knew that I wanted to slice it in the end. What I decided to do is just put in all the melodic ideas, all the change ups that I wanted to do, and not worry too much about the arrangement, because in the end I'm going to chop it anyways and then add all the processing on the master channel. Processing is kind of like filling a bucket with water. When you put in too much, it overflows, and the same goes for processing. If you do too much to it, it can just sound overprocessed. So I try to either do a lot of processing on the individual stems or a lot of processing on the master channel. So in this case, I decided to do everything in the end. So right now we only listen to the first part of the composition. Next up, in the second part of the composition, you'll hear the melody stop and the piano will come in and be a lot more free and just kind of jam out, improvise. Okay, there's one more element I added to the first part, which is the strings. The string aren't real strings. I used a contact bank called LA Scoring Strings. It was recommended to me by Ella Feingold, who worked on the Mellotron expansion pack with me that we just dropped, by the way, Mellotron expansion 03, if you want to check that out. But let's listen to the strings and how it sounds in the composition. All the other parts of this composition are basically just improvisations. There's a synth solo, and then there's a flute coming in, and the melodies kind of come in and go out. And I didn't worry about the arrangement of the sample because I knew I was going to chop it in the end. So we're just going to listen to the composition from here to the end and then go to the second part of this episode and see how I chop the sample. Before we go to the second part of this episode, I want to answer a question that I got after the first episode. The question is, when do I use a EQ like the Pro Q3 versus an EQ like the API 560? There is a very short answer to this. The FabFilter Pro Q3 is what I use for surgical stuff. So whenever I want to remove a frequency, for example, there might be a resonance from your microphone or from your room. So it has to be very precise and I just want it gone. The API 560, on the other hand, I like to use it for more rough changes. Whenever I want to low cut some stuff, when I want to boost some highs. So short answer, Pro Q3 for surgical stuff, API 560 for more drastic changes. Okay, so second part of the episode, let's listen to the sliced version of the sample again. So the sample was pitched down 3 half steps. I disabled warp, so when I pitch something down, the tempo gets slower. When I pitch something up, the tempo gets faster. In this case, I pitched it down 3 half steps, so we get this slower tempo. I created 1 slice for every 2 beats, so that's 2 slices per bar, but then ended up playing every beat. So that means that the second part of every slice, we're not going to hear that ever. It's hard to explain how I came up with the final sliced version because it's really just going by ear, trying stuff out. So whenever you slice, just put everything on your keyboard or your pad and then just play around. And when you have something, figure out the tempo later. Also, you can hear that there's a clear difference in processing from the original version. So I'm going to play to you without the processing first, then with the processing, and then I'm going to go into detail and tell you which plugins I used. Now with the processing. So the first plugin in the chain is the API 560, and I use it to boost the frequencies around 2 and 4K. By pitching down a sample, you kind of lose most of the brightness of it. So with the API, I just bring some of that back in. The next plugin is the RC20. This is a multi-effect plugin, but in this case, I only use the first element from it, the noise section. So that vinyl crackle that you hear is actually from RC20. The third plugin in the chain is the Vulf Compressor. I love the Vulf Compressor, most of you know that, because it emulates the sound of the 303 that was used a lot by Madlib. I created my own preset called the 303 L-Hog, and I'm going to put a link in the show description where you can download the preset for this plugin. And that's basically it. Just 3 plugins in the master chain. There's only one more plugin in there, which is a volume meter. I export all my samples at -15 LUFS, but maybe I can talk about this a bit more in another episode. So one more time, let's listen to the whole sample. And now that you know all the instruments that were used, try to hear the banjo, the glockenspiel, the piano, the drums, the bass, and so on. So thanks for listening to this second episode of the Minter Foundry Breakdowns. Come to my Discord, ask some questions there. I'm happy to answer them in the next episode or the one after. I think I'm gonna keep these going. The feedback has been amazing, and honestly, I love doing these. So make sure to give me some feedback. Make sure to follow the show. Go to minterfoundry.com, get some packs. That's the best way of supporting me. And keep making amazing music, and see you next time.